Have you ever asked yourself if destiny truly exists? If the right people are meant to cross paths again, no matter how much time passes? I used to believe it didn't. In fact, I used to not believe in much of anything. Not in my own voice, not in my own existence. My name is Jihyo, and for 22 years, I lived as if I were always on the edge of my own life, watching from a distance. I was a ghost in my own story. At 22, this should be the peak of youth, a time of blossoming, of dreams and plans. For me, it was just another day of silence. A day where I wondered if anyone someday would truly see me. Have you ever felt that? The crushing, lonely feeling that you're there, but nobody can actually perceive you? That you're a faint pencil draft in a world of vibrant, oil-painted canvases? That's me. I've always been that way. And no matter how much I yearned to be different, that shadow of insecurity always followed me, clinging to me like a second skin. My shyness wasn't just a trait. It was a physical barrier, a wall of glass between me and the rest of the world. I would see people in the university corridors, their faces open and full of expression, their voices ringing with confident laughter, and I would feel a distinct, painful separation. I was a spectator. I watched conversations as if I were a character in the background of a movie I wasn't a part of. My shoulders were always a little slumped inward, as if I were trying to occupy as little space as possible. It was a conscious effort to be invisible. I was a master of evasion. I'd pretend to check my phone when someone approached. I'd take a longer route to avoid a crowded cafeteria, and even held my breath for a moment when a stranger's gaze felt like it might linger on me for too long. The irony is that the only thing I truly wanted was to be seen. I fantasized about grand encounters, about someone spotting me in a crowded cafe and somehow knowing that we were made for each other. I would rehearse these movie scenes in my head, imagining a stranger's gentle smile, an outstretched hand, a voice saying my name as if it were a melody. But the harsh reality was that I could barely order a coffee without my voice trembling. My heart was a tumultuous storm of thoughts and emotions, a wild mix of romantic dreams and paralyzing fears. I was a walking contradiction, an incurable romantic who was terrified of getting close to anyone, a dreamer who was too afraid to live. And at the very core of this paradox was my low self-esteem, the persistent, insidious voice that would whisper, "Who would ever want you? You're so quiet, so boring, so ordinary." This voice was my most constant companion. It told me I was the kind of person that promises don't find, that stories don't fall in love with, and I, unfortunately, believed it. Every day was a cycle of waking up and feeling the weight of that silent sadness. I would sit at my desk, the silence of my apartment being both comforting and suffocating, and I would think about the life I could have had if I were just a little braver, a little more confident. But the thought was always followed by a wave of anxiety, a physical sensation of my chest tightening, my breath shortening. So the life I built for myself was a life of quiet precaution, of small, calculated steps, of safety. I was in a bubble, and it was my own creation, a prison built with my own hands. My bubble was my tiny apartment in Seoul, my sanctuary from the storms of the outside world. Inside, I felt safe. I could be whoever I wanted. I would read old romances, write in my diary, listen to melancholic music, and everything was perfect. But real life out there, real life was a storm I was too afraid to face. My heart yearned for a deep connection, but my mind had built an impenetrable fortress to keep everyone out. Real life out there was a storm, and I felt utterly unprepared for it. I lived in a quiet neighborhood in Seoul, a nice, unassuming area, but still a world away from the vibrant energy of the city center. I worked in a small, cozy library. It was my second home, my personal refuge, a place where the pervasive silence was a virtue, not a flaw. I loved the scent of old paper and leather-bound books, the way the dust motes danced in the golden afternoon sunbeams that filtered through the large windows. My days were a gentle, predictable routine. I would spend hours meticulously reorganizing shelves, a task that gave my anxious hands something to do. I would help customers with a soft, almost whispered voice and a shy smile, a minimal interaction that didn't require much of me. It was the only place where my silence was not a failure. People would approach my desk. I'd help them find a book, exchange a few brief words, and then retreat back into the quiet comfort of my work. It was a perfect arrangement, or at least I had convinced myself that it was. But no matter how much I told myself that this was the life I wanted, that I was content, deep down, in the most secret and guarded place of my heart, there was a raw, aching wound. It was an old wound, a ghost from my past, an echo of a broken promise. A promise I made to a boy who had taught me how to dream, how to laugh without fear, and who then suddenly disappeared. A wound that reminded me that no matter how hard I tried to believe, I couldn't trust promises. And this particular wound, this memory, it haunted me. It was like a constant phantom limb, a painful sensation that would return at the most unexpected times, a silent reminder of my own naivety. The story of this wound begins in a very different place from the bustling streets of Seoul. It begins in a small small countryside town, a place where time seemed to pass more slowly, where the fields stretched on forever, and where the night sky was so incredibly clear that you could see the stars with the naked eye. The name of the boy was Minjun. He was my best friend in the entire world, and the only person who truly understood me. We lived in the same apartment building, on the same floor. We were inseparable, like two sides of the same coin. He was my opposite in every conceivable way. Extroverted, brimming with an uncontainable energy, and completely fearless. He was a natural leader, the kind of person that other children gravitated to. And me, well, I was the Jihyo of today, but in miniature. Timid, quiet, and always with my head in the clouds. But Minjun, he saw me. He didn't just look at me, he looked into me. He made me laugh with his goofy jokes. He would pull me out of my solitary corner, and he would drag me into the craziest adventures an apartment building could offer. We'd build forts out of my mom's bed sheets, pretend to be world-class detectives, and spend endless hours talking on our secret rooftop, our private refuge. It was a magical place, where the city lights below us looked small and insignificant, and where it felt like we were the only two people in the entire universe. It was the only place where my crippling insecurity completely disappeared. Up there, he told me things he never told anyone else, and I felt safe enough to share my biggest dreams. He told me he wanted to be an architect so he could build places just like our rooftop, places where people could find peace and a piece of the sky. And it was there, on that rooftop, under a vast blanket of stars, that he made me a promise. He told me that no matter what happened, he would always find me. He said I was the only person who ever made him feel truly at home. But one day, he moved, just like that. His parents took him far away, to a city I had never heard of. The news hit me like a physical blow. The last time I saw him, he gave me a quick, tight hug and whispered that promise into my hair. "I'll find you, Jihyo. I promise." I remember that day as if it were yesterday. The sharp, aching emptiness in my chest, the deep pain in my heart, and the sickening feeling that something essential had been ripped away from me. My bubble, which he had helped me break, closed again, stronger and more impenetrable than ever before. My bubble, which he had helped me break, closed again, stronger and more impenetrable than ever before. The pain of his sudden departure was more than the pain of losing a friend. It was the unbearable agony of losing the one person who made me feel whole. It was the pain of watching my only real connection to the world simply vanish. The following months were a blur of grief. I went back to being the silent girl, but now with a thick new layer of sadness and a deep-seated suspicion of the world. My mom, in her gentle way, would try to talk to me, but I would just nod and retreat. School became an even harder place to endure. The teachers, busy with their lessons, barely noticed me, and my peers treated me as if I were a ghost. They looked right through me, and I, who was already an expert at being invisible, became a master. The years passed in a slow, melancholic haze. The pain, over time, transformed from a sharp, agonizing wound into a dull, throbbing scar. It was a silent, ever-present reminder that I should never open up to people again, that promises are fragile, easily broken, and ultimately meaningless. And no matter how much I wanted to forget, a small, stubborn part of me still clung desperately to that one promise, that one single word he had whispered into my hair, promise, to that hope. But even as I held on, the logical side of my brain would mock me. It told me it was foolish, childish. The world is too big, it said. People change. Destiny doesn't exist. And I, Jihyo, the ordinary girl who didn't stand out in anything, would certainly never be found. I would find myself on cold, lonely nights in my tiny apartment in Seoul, with my head buried in my pillow, silently asking if he still remembered me. If he still remembered our rooftop, our conversations, the specific little details of my drawings that he used to admire. I would wonder if he had found someone else who made him feel at home, someone who was braver, louder, more interesting than me. And the answer, for me, was always a resounding yes. Because why would he remember such a plain girl? Why would a friendship that meant so much to me have meant anything to him? And that doubt, that deep-seated uncertainty, it gnawed at me. It consumed me. It left me in a constant, low-level state of anxiety. My phone, a constant companion, was both a comfort and a source of pain. A silent reminder of all the people I wasn't brave enough to text, of all the invitations I wasn't confident enough to accept. And then one day, he appeared. It was a particularly dreary, rainy afternoon. The bell above the library door chimed, a sound I had heard countless times, but this time, it felt different, like a note in a forgotten melody. I instinctively looked up to greet the new customer. He was tall, with dark, slightly messy hair and a coat that was speckled with raindrops. He smiled faintly as he looked around, a smile that made my heart give a sudden, painful lurch. It was a familiar smile. He walked slowly through the aisles, his eyes curious, scanning the spines of the books as if he were looking for something he didn't didn't know he had lost. The air around me felt thick and charged, and then he stopped at my desk. He seemed to be in his early 20s, with broad shoulders that had lost their boyishness and a tired, searching expression in his eyes. He looked at the library, then at the book I was holding, and then his gaze landed on me, and our eyes met. My breath caught in my throat. In that instant, I saw it. The same kind eyes as that boy who made me promises on a rooftop. The same gentle, curious expression of a boy who saw the world with an infinite sense of wonder. My heart froze, then began to pound so hard I was sure he could hear it. My hands resting on my desk started to tremble. "Jihyo?" he said, his voice a low, warm tone, a sound I hadn't realized I had missed until that very moment. "Is that you?" It's Minjun." And just like that, in a single, quiet word, my entire world, my protective bubble, fell apart. The rest of the library seemed to fade into a blur of color. The sound of the rain against the windows became a distant hum, and the only thing I could hear was the frantic, irregular beat of my own heart. He was there, standing right in front of me. The irrefutable, beautiful, impossible proof that destiny existed. Proof that destiny existed. I couldn't find a single word to say. The shock and emotion were so overwhelming that my voice simply vanished. I just nodded my head, tears welling up in my eyes, a silent, joyful confession of disbelief and hope. He smiled, a genuine, relieved smile, and I saw a mirroring tear in the corner of his own eye. It was him. It really was. The Minjun I had carried in my heart for so long, the one who existed only in my memories and in the silent, hopeful corners of my mind. He was real, and he was here. He gently reached across the desk and took my hand, his touch warm and familiar, a jolt of recognition that sent a shiver down my spine. "You never did learn to talk much, did you?" he said with a soft chuckle, and the sound of his laugh was like a melody I hadn't heard in years. It was a song I remembered loving, but had forgotten the notes of. It was in that moment that all the pain, all the doubt, all the years of feeling invisible simply melted away. In his eyes, I was not a ghost. I was not a timid girl. I was just Jihyo. The Jihyo he had known. The Jihyo he had promised to find. We spent the next several hours in a quiet corner of the library, the rain still drumming on the windows, and we talked. We talked about everything. He told me he had become an urban architect, a profession he had chosen because it allowed him to create public green spaces, little oases of nature in the concrete jungle. "I guess I never forgot our starry forest," he said, and my heart fluttered. "I'm still trying to bring a little bit of that magic to the city." He told me about his projects, about how he still loved to draw, and how he had started to take photos of the landscapes he created. It was the same passion he had as a boy, a passion for creating beauty and peace. And I, who had never truly opened up to anyone about my deepest self, found myself talking without fear. The words just tumbled out, unedited and unafraid. I felt like I was talking to an old part of myself, a piece I had been missing for so long. The comfortable silence we had as children came back to us, filling the gaps in our conversation with a sense of quiet understanding. It was as if no time at all had passed. He remembered every detail, every small moment that I thought was insignificant. The time I gave him one of my drawings, a lotus flower that he kept in his wallet for years. The day we both got soaked running from the playground to the building, the tuna sandwich I always had for lunch. He remembered everything. And I, who thought I was just a blur in people's lives, was a clear and vivid memory in his. When it was finally time for him to leave, he didn't just say goodbye. He took a pen from my desk and wrote his number on a napkin. "Don't disappear again, Jihyo," he said, his eyes filled with a sincerity that was so uniquely him. "Promise me you won't." And I promised. My promise was not just to him. It was a promise to myself, to not hide anymore, to not let myself disappear again. The next few weeks were a blur of texts and calls that stretched into late nights. My phone, once a source of social anxiety, now became the bridge to a world I hadn't known was waiting for me. He would ask me about my day, not in a polite, passing way, but with genuine curiosity. He'd send me photos of the new park he was working on, of the sketches he was doing, and I'd send him photos of the different coffee art I was learning to make. We'd meet after my shift for lunch, for coffee, or for long walks through the parks he designed. I started to see Seoul in a different way, through his eyes. He'd point out the way the sunlight hit the trees he had planted, or the small, thoughtful details he had added to a stone path. He saw the world with the same quiet, gentle curiosity he had as a child, and in his company, I started to see it that way too. And he still saw me. He noticed everything. The way my eyes would light up when I talked about a good book, the small, shy smiles I'd try to hide, the way my hands would get cold when I was nervous. He noticed the details of my quietness, but he never tried to change them. He just embraced them. The old voices of insecurity still tried to creep in. Why is he spending so much time with you? He's so cool, so confident. He must have so many friends. He's just being nice. But then I'd look at him, at his kind, steady steady eyes, at his genuine smile, and the voices would fade into a distant whisper. He was different from anyone else. He never made me feel like I had to be more, to talk more, to laugh louder. He just made me feel like I was already enough. He would listen patiently to my stories, not just with his ears, but with his whole being. He would ask me questions, not to fill the silence, but because he genuinely wanted to know. And when I would fall silent, he would never force me to speak. He would just hold the silence with me, a comfortable shared space where I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. Our conversations weren't just about catching up, they were about rediscovering our connection, piece by piece. He told me about his own struggles, the loneliness he felt after moving away. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the only one with problems. And in seeing his vulnerability, I felt safe enough to share my own. I started to notice the way he looked at me when I wasn't looking, the way his smile would deepen when I laughed. I started to notice small things about him that I hadn't noticed before, the way his dark eyes would twinkle under the streetlights, the way he would run a hand through his hair when he was thinking. And then my feelings for him started to change. My heart, which used to pound with anxiety, now pounded with something new, something scary, something that felt like love. My friendship with Minjin was the one thing in my world that was solid. It was my anchor, my safe harbor. But now, my anchor was becoming my deepest fear. I was falling in love with him, and I didn't know what to do. One part of me wanted to scream to the world about what I was feeling. The other part wanted to hide in my apartment and never come out. I remembered the pain of losing him once, and the prospect of losing him again, this time forever, was unbearable. I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake at night, tossing and turning, thinking about every laugh we shared, every moment of silence, every word he said to me. And I would wonder if he felt the same, but how could he? He was so confident, so successful, and I was just me, the invisible girl from the library. On one of our walks, he mentioned a person he had reconnected with. I ran into a childhood friend, Sora, he said. His eyes lit up when he said her name. She stayed in our hometown, and she's so cool, so much fun. We went out for coffee, and it was like no time had passed at all. And my heart, which was full of a new and fragile hope,